Okay, I think it works now. Yeah. So, welcome and thank you for being here. I'm very happy actually about this opportunity to show the lonely trees of Rojava Film Commune, and also to show some support. No, it's the first time that Museum of Care makes a screening about something, as Nika was mentioning before, and so I could say just why. For me, it was important to organize with Nika and Abby this beautiful evening. And it's because when I was working in Documenta as an art mediator, I had the chance to view in the museum this movie and other movies from the Rojava Film Commune, and I was really amazed. And I saw the reaction of the people that were watching this movie and didn't want to go away. And so they were really involved, and everybody was really I don't know, curious, but also really fascinated and really interested in what was seen in the movie and in the films. And also after the earthquake that all you know was like a big earthquake in Turkey, Syria, and also Rojava partially because it was spread around. There was a big impact, of course, for a lot of people. So to show some support can be also something that Museum of Care can actually do, because there is a network of people that are really ready to help. And so this is the reason why we are here, actually, very, very shortly.
Yeah, so thank you, Paula, for organizing that. And now I think we should invite to speak David Bookchin. Thank you for coming. That's amazing. We're very proud to have you.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And, it's especially poignant for me because this kind of intersects the areas that I really worked most closely with David Graeber on Rojava. And of course, he and Nika started the Museum of Care. So in some ways, I feel like he's with us here in spirit, and I think he would be very pleased to see this event happening tonight. And especially because the support that I hope it will generate, in terms of both the folks who are here tonight or afternoon if you're from the United States tuning in, but also as you talk to your friends and hopefully they talk to their friends, the support that I hope it will generate for both Heyva Sor directly, which is doing all the earthquake aid in the Kurdish regions, but also for the whole Kurdish project in Rojava, which is so important right now and which is needed really more than ever. I mean, Rojava really, really needs our support in many ways, and obviously a financial donation. And I think Paula's put into the chat where you can donate, but also just the process of being educated about Rojava and sort of bringing it into our own communities and our own movements, I think is really important. As just to talk for a moment about the earthquake, as Paula mentioned, there on February 6th, there was this 7.8 magnitude earthquake that just devastated the regions and hit among the regions hardest hit were the Kurdish regions in southeastern Turkey, but also it spread into northeast Syria and even beyond, and in an area that was particularly important to the Kurdish region called Afrin, which was really basically almost sort of a fourth perhaps of the well, not that much, but a big chunk of territory. It was home for a long time to about 1 million people until Turkey invaded Afrin in 2018. And during that invasion, hundreds of thousands of people fled the region, but still many, many remained. And it was a very hard hit region. And it's really because it is now occupied and run by Turkish jihad, they're Turkish-backed jihadi gangs now that have both suppressed the culture and also suppressed the people and engaged in kidnapping and ransoms and rapes. And it's been been a terrible place to be if you're a Kurdish person. But because it's basically been since 2018 cut off from the rest of Rojava and was badly hit by the earthquake, really it's been very hard to get aid to them, and it has been basically neglected, not really cared about by Turkey, and certainly not cared about by the regime. So the Kurdish Red Crescent has been really the one aid organization that has been able to get through, to get aid in there. And that's what makes donations to them tremendously important, and they're doing so much. They've not only tried to provide food and tents for people to live in, because as I'm sure most of you know, hundreds of thousands of people were also displaced. They estimate that a total of 2.5 million people were displaced by this earthquake, but certainly, many, 125,000 people, lost their homes. And so I just, the fact that the Kurdish Red Crescent is really the only aid organization that consistently helps folks, and not, like I said, not just with food and tents, but also bringing medical care and giving people even money who have literally no money to buy food or to find shelter. So that's been very important. And the other thing that's been happening is, I'm sure some of you know, is this sort of ongoing campaign by Turkey against the Kurdish people. And I think the most recent thing that was in the news was several days ago, Turkey tried to assassinate Mazlum Abdi, who's basically the commander-in-chief of the Syrian Democratic Forces. Those are the forces made up of the Kurdish YPG and the YPJ, the women's defense units, and the defense units in general, but also Arab forces, coalitions, Syrians, others who have been really the boots on the ground, instrumental in fighting ISIS. And there's a strange kind of fine line that these Western countries are walking, in which they are, on the one hand, trying to support the SDF because they know that ISIS is resurging already, and that even though the caliphate itself was eliminated geographically, there's still many ISIS cells and a lot of opportunity, including the 10,000 or so prisoners that still remain on Syrian soil. So a lot of opportunity for the resurgence of ISIS. So Western nations like Great Britain and the UK support the SDF, but at the same time, because Turkey is a NATO ally, they are generally very reluctant to criticize these kinds of heinous crimes that Turkey is engaging in, using often unmanned aerial vehicles or drones that have killed not only commanders of the SDS, but many civilians. Basically, Turkey treats the Kurdish people as, and there are 5 million people now living in Rojava, including several million Kurds, as if they are all terrorists because of Turkey's ongoing war with the PKK. So it's been a very difficult time for Rojava, and really Rojava desperately needs our support. And as I'm sure many of you know who have followed the Kurdish freedom movement, one of the reasons why the Kurdish freedom movement took hold to begin with was because of the immense oppression of Turkey and the other 3 states, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, against the Kurdish people. And one of the things that's very exciting about watching this film is that we're going to get to see some of the really beautiful and unique music that has been passed down through the ages, from, in many cases, via oral tradition, through the Kurdish people. And as I was saying, the idea that a people could live in a country like Turkey where they would be denied the ability to speak their own language, where they're not allowed to sing their own music, where they're not allowed to dress in their customary clothing, all of those things are just, it's unimaginable. And yet that has been a lot of the Kurdish people in the region for so many decades, until some concessions have been won, and this has been largely through the insurgency of the PKK. So I think that the opportunity, and I think it goes obviously without saying that these kinds of cultural things, and in this case, the beautiful music that we're about to hear, is what really holds a culture together. It's what makes us aware of our history. It's what makes us aware of our purpose in the world. It's what ties us to our ancestors. And I think you will see all of that in the film that we are about to screen for you, and that it again sort of makes it particularly poignant that Kurdish culture continues to thrive, and that despite this immense repression, there is just really a tremendous will, a fortitude, a power, and that a lot of that comes, and I'll just finish up here because I know we want to get to the film, but a lot of that really comes from the Turkish project of democratic confederalism. And as I mentioned earlier, it's one of the things that really brought me and David together in a long-lasting working relationship. This idea that if you give people the tools and the space and the ability, they can self-govern. And that is what has made this project in Rojava so important and so unique. And aside from sort of what's going on with the Zapatistas in Chiapas, Mexico, I don't think there's really hardly anything like it anywhere quite in the world, because in Rojava you have a situation in which 5 million people of all types of ethnicities. So it's not just Kurds, even though it's a kind of a Kurdish model, but also the Arabs, the Syriacs, Christians, the Syrians, the Yazidi people are living in a way in which every single person basically is empowered to be the custodian of their community. And that's done through a process of local assemblies in which people get together, discuss, debate, and decide and make decisions, and often using consensus, reach decisions about how they want their communities to function and therefore to flourish. And this extends into cooperatives, many cooperative economic ventures. And of course, it extends into the two other pillars, aside from direct democracy, of the Kurdish movement, which is the feminism and also, the ecology. And so these efforts really are grounded in this very strong sense of being a non-capitalist and custodial attitude towards the natural world, and also in the strong empowerment of women. And I often say that sort of anybody who considers themselves a feminist or who has friends who are feminists, should be really learning about and supporting the movement in Rojava, because it is a place where, having been there myself, like David was, where it's just astounding to see how women really are basically in charge of society in every aspect, of economic, political, social life. And, not to say that men obviously don't have a say, but the empowerment of women there, and especially at a time right now, I can't speak for the rest of the Western world, but certainly in the United States, where women's rights are completely under assault, where abortion is being outlawed, and practically the use of contraception is also practically being outlawed, to see a society in which women actually are the only ones allowed to make decisions about women's lives and women's bodies is really quite extraordinary.
Actually, I never asked you, Debbie, when did you first time hear about Rojava? How did it happen?
I think, like a lot of people, I first heard about Rojava in 2000, well, really at the beginning of the Syrian war. It was 2011, but it was really 2012 when Rojava declared itself independent. But actually, I suppose most people Rojava really came to the fore in 2014 during the Battle of Kobani, when there was this sense that ISIS was going to take the city of Kobani, which is right on the Turkish border, actually, the northern part of Syria on the Turkish border. And there was the heroic fight that went over a period of months through the fall and into the winter, in which the Kurdish armed defense forces, the people's, they're called the People's Defense Units, and they're called defense very deliberately because they're about defending, not about aggression, fought so heroically and prevented, after ISIS had, I think, I don't know, something like 80% of the city under its control, they took back the city. And of course, they did do that with the help of American air support. The Americans waited really as long as they possibly could to support the Kurdish forces, trying in every way to see if there were other groups that they could support, but nobody had the fortitude to do what the Kurdish men and women fighting for Kobani did. And so that's how I heard about it. And one of the things I wanted to pick up on, something that Nikos said about the movie, which is, I think that one of the things that's very sort of apparent in the film, which people can finish later on, is the connection between the Kurdish people and their geography. You know, and the movie is called the Lonely Tree. And I think that's sort of a sense of, it gives you a sense in which really people feel that if this culture isn't preserved, they lose that sense of history. They lose that sense of understanding of their roots, and sort of, you know, as they say, you haven't seen this yet, but at the end of the movie, I've seen it before, and at the end of the movie they say, you know, if our culture disappears, we disappear with it. And so this is a very, again, sort of ties back to the defense of the communities of Rojava, the sense of belonging, the sense of community, the sense of history and common custom. And I think that the movie captures that very well. And I really hope people will go and use the YouTube link that Nika sent and take a look at it, because it's such a beautiful movie, and the singing is just more and more beautiful as the movie goes on. So I just wanted to.
Yeah, Debbie, but I also want to ask you about internationalism, not only Kurdish culture, because it looks to me that Rojava is one of the very small part of Middle East where people from different social, cultural, and national backgrounds are actually living together in peace. Everybody else is like keep fighting, but these guys have like everybody, like Armenians, I don't know, internationalists, Europeans, Assyrians, Kurdish, Arabic, whoever else. Even like, you know, they have 10,000 ISIS ex-fighters that, as David was always saying, there as a rehabilitation program in prison, they're teaching them interior design, you know. So that's like something really interesting. So they are kind of about preserving their language and their culture, as we can see in this movie, but somehow magically it's super internationalist. And so I would like to ask why, yeah, because,
you know, I think that one of the things that they understand so beautifully, and again, you know, this movie is just about one very small aspect of Kurdish culture, so it's not trying to do that. But one of the things that they understand is that the strength of Rojava comes precisely from the multi-ethnicity, from the many people who make up the union of the geographical area. And that for historically, I mean, the way nation states work, what's so horrific about nationalism is it's about pitting one culture against another. And we're seeing that right now in Turkey, where Erdogan, in preparation for the May elections, is doing as much as he can to villainize, as always, the Kurds and anybody who doesn't subscribe to his very narrow notion, you know, of what it means to, frankly, to be a human being, which is to be Turkish and to be Islamic. So, you know, what's beautiful about Rojava, and I think that this is partly inspired from its strong ecological foundations. You know, in ecology, we always talk about how the strength of an ecosystem is really based on its diversity. You know, like my father used to say, unity in diversity. And the more diverse it is, the more stable it is, the easier it is for it to remain stable. And so the sort of philosophy or the ethos in Rojava is that part of the reason why Rojava is so extraordinary is precisely because of what all the different cultures bring to the table. And there's a very strong element of wanting, for example, you know, under Assad, that region, you could only go to school in the language of Arabic. And now you can study in Arabic, you can study in Kurdish, you can study in the Syriac language. So the Kurds have really made an effort. And I haven't gone into that much detail because I just assumed people here had a certain familiarity with how Rojava is structured, but I could talk about that a little more. I mean, for example, you know, in the schools, you can choose which language you want to study in, at least in the primary schools among those three. And in a similar way, as Nika was saying, there is an effort, a very profound effort towards restorative justice. People aren't just put in jail for infractions. People are, it's a model actually that, you know, again, all the rest of us would do well in with our overcrowded prison systems to learn from. There's an effort in which people use mediation. One of the things that I found particularly poignant when I was in Rojava was the houses that are run by women. They're called malajin, jin meaning women, and they sort out disputes between people in the neighborhood. I mean, they're specifically there for women, but they also, like if a woman is being abused by her husband, she'll come to malajin, and the women there will hear her story and then go get the man and bring him in and have a dialogue and start these kinds of, you know, discussions that are designed to avoid going to criminal court. But so this is at work throughout the culture. And I met also when I was there, you know, women, Christian women, who told me that they were such a tiny minority that they never had a chance to play a role in the political life of their communities, and now they are. And part of one of the things that Rojava, as I'm sure many of you know, ensures happens is that every mayor or every major administrator is co-chaired always by a woman, always by a man, and always by people of two different ethnicities. So that's a very, very important part of the culture too.
Maybe somebody else has a question.
Does anybody have a question? Or? And by the way, I just want to make a point also that I put into the chat, that if you want to know more or you'd like to get involved in Kurdish solidarity, it would be wonderful if you want to come to one of our emergency committee for Rojava meetings, which happen online as well as in person. And our next one is on Wednesday, April 19th at 7. And you can get information about how to register. And, you know, because not to put too much emphasis on this, but there are many things that we can in the West do to show our solidarity with this important movement. Anyway, I'm happy to, if anybody has any thoughts or comments, or if I can answer any other question, I'm happy to.
Can I ask something?
Sure.
So as you mentioned, I think you mentioned about the elections coming in Turkey very, very soon, and it's a very important turning point in the recent Turkish history. I think the first time after 10, 15, 20 years even, Erdogan will may not be president. It's 50%. I'm following it close to the news because in Greece we also have elections at the same time. So a lot of complications between Greece nationalism and Turkish nationalism. It's very, very silly and goofy, but serious nonetheless competition of nationalisms. Each other uses the other as the enemy, and that stopped briefly during the earthquake, where we were the savior brothers, and then immediately after 3 weeks we became again, you know, the usual And so these elections now, it will be the first time that that we may have a situation where Erdogan is not president. And I was catching up with some old articles I was reading about from some sources I have about some analysis around that. So my question basically is, if anyone here has any thoughts on how the possible change in the regime of Erdogan would have any impact. For example, one thought of another comrade was that in this scenario, which would be one of the most wished for by revolutionaries, which is Erdogan's regime collapsing, it might be possible to have the impact of Turkey kind of losing its step while fighting on too many open fronts, and also the war at Ukraine, if that complicates things even more. So maybe it's wishful thinking, but this comrade was saying that maybe the Rojava revolution could become the blueprint for other revolutions in Turkey or in the surrounding area that could happen, triggered, helped, whatever, from this change of the regime. I don't know, I wonder if there are any thoughts around that?
Do other people have anything they would like to say, or please jump in, you know. I mean,
say that, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Nika, sorry.
I think Rojava is definitely a blueprint, but election is never something that I would trust as a regime changer or any changer. Something that's would be my thought about this. Maybe.
You know, the people, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, which has been waging this insurgency now for decades, has really adopted, I've been talking about democratic confederalism, but I haven't mentioned really the person who brought all of this sort of forward in the Kurdish movement, and that's Abdullah Öcalan, who's the imprisoned leader of the PKK, and he's been in the Imrali prison on an island in the Marmara Sea since 1999 by himself, basically, mostly in isolation for most of that time. And his thinking, and he's written many, many books, and I urge people to look for them and to take a look at them. His thinking is what has really inspired this movement away from separatism towards this idea of democratic confederalism, which is that people really stay, sort of work in this directly democratic way and stay, for the time being at least, within nation state borders. So often you'll read an article, say, about the Kurds, and they'll say the separatist movement of the Kurds. And that's completely wrong now. And it's actually kind of shameful that journalists, some of them at very prominent publications, haven't educated themselves about the fact that the PKK's position on this has been changed now for really 2 decades. So they're not trying to create a separate Kurdish state. It's very different from the Kurdish approach in Iraq, which did for a while contemplate and have a referendum on separating from the rest of Iraq. Rather, what they say is we want a federated system where the states are basically controlled through a series of federated autonomous regions. And in that sense, I think it really is a great model. It's really the most democratic model that we see in the Middle East right now. And I think it would be sort of an extraordinary development if this next election allows for somebody to come into power who would begin to have kind of a negotiation process with the leaders of the PKK, because they had, even Erdogan himself, Erdogan wasn't always as much of a fundamentalist as he is now. When he first came into power, he actually talked about trying to solve the so-called Kurdish question. And his people were engaging in direct talks with Abdullah Öcalan, even though Öcalan was in prison at the time. And it's been Erdogan's very hard turn to the right, to this kind of extremist position, that has made his standoff with the Kurds so much more intense and so much more rigid. But as recently as I don't know, a year ago or so, Jamil Bayek, who is one of the Kurdish leaders in Kandil in the mountains of Iraq, which is where they are headquartered now, he wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, and he said what we would like is for countries like the United States and other Western countries to help us broker peace negotiations with Erdogan. They have been, even since the earthquake, engaged in a unilateral ceasefire. So really, there is a great desire among the Kurdish people to reach some kind of resolution with the Turkish state. And whether or not that can happen and whether or not Erdogan stays in power remains to be seen, but it could be a very exciting development if it does.
Just to add that I totally agree with you, Nika, on the elections, and I don't really believe that any election could. So rather, my comment was more like in a geopolitical analysis, how this election may trigger something. For example, reading from the same article, it was noting that the Kurdish nationalities live in all these countries as minorities, like Syria, Iran, Iraq, also Lebanon, Armenia, I think as well. So the whole point of this question also brought here was that the change of the regime could trigger something as an indirect effect that could either help or not. So I was just wondering if people have any thoughts about that. But yeah, my personal opinion is that more government is more bad news, or a new government usually it's bad news, it's not good news. But yeah, let's see. It's interesting.
Maybe I would like to ask Michael to ask specific questions about, and somebody can help here to answer them. If Paolo or Debbie, you were asking about how help can get to Rojava part of affected by the earthquake, because we are trying to fundraise, and we will put the little clips around for fundraising.
I mean, just there's a whole series of impacts of the earthquake, as well as impacts of the war, and to what extent is Rojava in the sort of more in the east affected by the earthquake, and to what extent is their ability to get support for places, other places affected by the earthquake. And then maybe just another question, maybe a little bit, because if I understand right, the area that is sort of controlled by the original kind of Rojava impetus is now quite a long area along the top, along just below the border with Turkey, and it's now not a majority Kurdish, and yet there's a lot of people that are organized. So maybe just I'd be interested to know why so many Arabs joined forces and were part of that networked form of governance that was created originally in Rojava.
There's been a really, really conscious effort to create buy-in by other ethnic communities, Michael. And I think that's been one of the great sort of triumphs of the Rojava experience and project, which is education, education, and more education. There is, for example, when they declared independence, during the war in 2012, when Assad kind of removed his troops from that region to go fight in other parts of Syria, and the Kurds were able to kind of declare the independence of the region, one of the first things they did was they organized committees, and the women were especially active in this, that went around sort of door to door, village by village, to talk to women in their communities and try to engage them and bring them into, they call them academies, you know, where they do education and where they talk about women's history and the history of different ethnicities. And so there's been, I think, serious buy-in because frankly, the project works, because what even Arab leaders have seen is that they have more autonomy and independence. And certainly this thing, it doesn't happen just sort of like by magic. You know, there have been problems, there have been conflicts, there have been clan leaders who don't, you know, one of the you know, basic precepts in the Rojava social contract, and they call it a social contract, not a constitution, because it's specifically not a state document, but a social contract between the people, says that, you know, that women have full rights, and that therefore, for example, you know, men should not be polygamous. Well, they've had a hard time at times with that, because certain clan leaders in Arab communities are polygamous and they wanted to remain polygamous. So they have had to walk a kind of a negotiated line and, you know, go through periods where they didn't just come in and rigidly enforce a bunch of rules that they thought were right. They tried to get buy-in from all the different people and all the different communities. And I think, and it's still an ongoing process. You know, this is not some magic perfect utopia, not by any means. And there are still many, many struggles, but considering what they've done in a time of under 10 years, essentially, of ongoing conflict and warfare. And when they finally defeated ISIS, then they suddenly had Turkey jumping in and, you know, jumping on them. And also, just to say something about the geography, Rojava is not just one strip across the border with Turkey. In fact, it's not even contiguous. There's a part and the farther in the eastern part, it used to be comprised of 3 cantons. Now they call it 7 regions. So, but the original 3 cantons that we were talking about started on the eastern side closest to the Iraq border and went across the top and included Kamishlo, the largest city really in that region, and then Kobani. And then there's sort of a break. And then there was Afrin, the part that I described earlier that was taken. And that is in a pocket of land that's like almost like a little peninsula that kind of goes up into the Turkish area. And that's the part that was taken by Turkey. It's also a very beautiful and ecologically rich area with thousands and thousands of olive trees, many of which have been cut down by the jihadis that now run Afrin. And it was a very stable region during the war. So many, many people, there were many refugees and IDPs who came into Afrin, and of all ethnicities, and who came to live under the democratic and federalist system there, and who kind of learned over the years until 2018 when Turkey invaded, you know, that this was actually a very you know, remarkable and empowering system. So that's been how that process has worked, really. And I think that it really has created tremendous buy-in. And like I said, when I was there, you know, people said to me, oh, well, you know, I'm a Christian woman and I originally didn't think, I thought this was crazy. But now, you know, I'm a co-chair on the city council, and I see how important this is and how the people of my community are finally being recognized. So I think that's been really important. Maybe we should see if there's one more question and then wrap up and give people time to go watch the rest of the film. That would be nice. if there is any.
I have a question. Maybe the last question would be about your father, Miroy Bookchin, because maybe people don't know, how he connected to Rojava revolution and how does it happen? Who is he?
That's a lovely question. Thanks, Meek. I'm always happy to talk about my father. My father was a longtime philosopher and social theorist and activist as well, Murray Bookchin. He wrote more than 24 books on history and social theory, and, for example, the anarchist movement in Spain and a history of popular revolutions, 4 volumes called The Third Revolution. But he was also known as one of the first people to really introduce ecology, the concept of ecology, into social theory. So he started writing about ecology back in the early 1960s and even in the late 1950s. And one of the main theses of his sort of work was that all environmental problems occur because at their root there are social problems, and those social problems include things like capitalism, which has a rapacious attitude towards the earth and the natural environment, which is namely grow or die. Either your big business gets bigger and bigger, or it's going to collapse. So therefore we have to have a completely extractive attitude towards the planet and its resources. And also he took on sort of traditional leftist theory, arguing that it wasn't enough, that while Marx was certainly brilliant, it wasn't enough to think of the proletariat as the hegemonic class. In other words, to think of economics as the driving force for all social change, that really we had to go beyond class inequality and look at other forms of social inequality, hierarchy and domination, whether it be, men dominating women, or the young being dominated by the old, or people, the ableness domination, all the many different forms of social stratification. And so I think what he brought really uniquely to social theory was this idea that we won't really change the world by simply eliminating economic inequality. We really have to change the world by addressing all sorts of forms of domination and hierarchy. And he wrote about this early, even in the 1960s, in books like Post-Scarcity Anarchism. And then, of course, his sort of magnum opus is The Ecology of Freedom. And, so one of the things that he believed was that one of the ways that we would make a kind of a more free and egalitarian society would be by what he called libertarian municipalism, the idea that we go on the local level, something which, by the way, the right in the United States has succeeded in doing quite well, and try and organize within our communities and create local assemblies. And so he wrote a lot actually about urban planning and design and cities as well. And this kind of idea of face-to-face grassroots democracy was something that was very intriguing also, and his ideas about hierarchy, to Abdullah Öcalan. And Öcalan actually wrote to my father before he died through his lawyers. At that time, he was still allowed to have some communication with the outside world, which he has not been allowed to have in the last 2 or 3 years. Which, by the way, is a separate story, but a huge, human rights violation on Turkey's part. And so they had a little bit of an exchange sort of through his lawyers, but he also, because a lot of my father's books have been translated into other languages, including Turkish, Öcalan told sort of the Kurdish diaspora and the people living in different cities and towns in Turkey to read some of this work, specifically The Ecology of Freedom in Turkish, and a book on cities called From Urbanization to Cities. And so they started to implement some of this in Turkey even before Rojava. So in the southeast of Turkey already, the Kurds were electing Kurdish mayors and were starting to do this kind of form of what, like I said, my father calls libertarian municipalism and what Öcalan calls democratic confederalism. So that's sort of the little bit of cross-fertilization of ideas that happened there. And one of the things that Öcalan did, which is wonderful, is he took some of these ideas that my father had started on domination and hierarchy, and he really especially focused in on women and the need for the true, deep, and empowerment of women, and kind of amplified those ideas to really create what I called before essentially a women's revolution. So it's been very exciting to see how those ideas have flourished. And for folks who want to know more, and there's many books by Murray Bookchin out there. AK Press has published a lot of them, and Verso did a book. I did a book with Verso of his essays that were specifically about this kind of organizing and the need for the left to organize kind of in this what he calls communalist concept of kind of getting people activated on the local level and really trying to make change that way, with the idea that, for those of us in the United States who, sort of like, for example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or whatever, that it's not enough to go into a voting booth and just vote for a progressive candidate, because that just actually strengthens the state. And what we need to do is we need to break down the state by building up the localities and the communities and the municipalities so that they ultimately can confederate together and form a kind of a countervailing power to the nation state, because the nation state is really at the root of oppression, of violence, of domination, of patriarchy. And I could go on, but I'll stop there. Thanks, Nika, for the opportunity to say a little bit about my dad's ideas. I think he's a really important thinker for the 20th century and beyond, and that at a time when the left in the United States is kind of floundering and is stuck in a lot of ways, rehashing various aspects of identity politics and this and that some of his ideas about organizing and really trying to create countervailing institutions to the nation state can be very, very important.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. And so I think I would just repeat that here's 2 places to addresses to donate money that maybe we can all copy and share in our social media, or whenever we can. And yeah, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties again. I'm really grateful to Paola, who got the idea to do that, and maybe she can close up the session.
Yes, no, I'm very happy about this evening, even if there were like some technical problem. Yeah, but it happens all the time. So we can watch it on ourselves, I think, especially if you want, one of the most touching parts for me, it's like basically like the final 10 minutes. They are very important for me. So if you have like the chance, because I know that there is also one filmmaker, no? I mean, at least one among us. You said it before, no? If I'm correct. So maybe it's also interesting to see how filmmaking is used as a tool now to reimagine also like our social situation, the past, the present, and the future. So it is said like the not yet present. It is a way also to tell stories, to make them like known to the new generations, and also to acknowledge what has been done in the past. So I think it is a nice way also to see filmmaking as this kind of tool. It can be like an interesting point of view for you, but maybe you already know, but this is one of the most important things, I think, for me.
Anyone want to say anything for the closing?
I've got one thing to say. It's just like an idea that people have been working on here that I think would be a good one to spread around. And that is creating food trails. And that is having a regularly accessed trail that the community comes together and grows food along the side of, so that all along that trail, which can be over multiple cities, like there's bike trails around here that go through 2-3 cities, and if there is consistent food being grown along that trail, then that has food stability for multiple communities.
That sounds great, and I think lots of some of the ideas of municipalism includes communities controlling their own energy supply, working on their own economies, and these are some. So I mean, I think those types of things are really things that projects like that are things that people can do in their own community that starts to build a network locally that can build into something when you have an opportunity.
Absolutely. And once it gets off the ground more and more people are interested in it, we can implement other things like spots with harm reduction measures in there, like a little shed full of like harm reduction kits would be something that we could get going in the future, but not necessarily right away.
Thank you everybody for coming, and yeah, hopefully we can make some difference and help to the people, to the great people of Rojava.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you for organizing.
Paola. It was great.
Oh, no, thanks to you, thanks to Sevinac, and to all of you that came here. Thank you very much.
Rojava Film Commune, right?
Yeah, exactly.